Hello, everyone. Legends are not born. They become legendary through their thoughts, words, and deeds in pursuit of something bigger, strategic, and for a noble cause. One of the many things that legends do is to inspire a whole lot of leaders to follow their footsteps and carve out their own journey of impact. It's a kind of virtuous cycle. Now, what can we learn from these legends? There is one person who evokes unbelievable admiration, awe, and fondness across all generations and consistently. He's a person who's loved and respected by grandparents as well as grandchildren alike. He's a symbol of humility, trust, and utmost credibility. He's a well known industrialist, philanthropist, and a visionary. His ideas have been path breaking, and his impact has been really colossal. He is globally admired by business leaders, academicians, thinkers and philosophers, and even political leaders. His list of achievements and credentials is endless. His love for cars, dogs, and flying jets is well known. He keeps getting better and better with age, whether it is business acumen or generosity and purpose to make an impact on humanity. In a constellation, he is the North Star. Words and adjectives cannot suffice his deeds. Metaphorically, and I personally believe he's like a lighthouse, wellspring, and a windmill to many people. For those who studied chemistry, in the Mendeleev's periodic table, I would consider him like a rare earth element. Yes, he's a living legend and is our guest today for this episode on Journey of Legends. Friends, no more surprises. He's one and only Mr. Ratan Tata, the chairman and emeritus of Tata Sons. Good afternoon, Mr. Tata.
Good afternoon.
Thank you, Mr. Tata, for being a very special guest today on the show. Let me extend a warm welcome from the entire team of Center of Strategic Mindset. How are you doing, sir?
Fine, thanks. After an introduction like that, um, you sort of look for the hole to climb into. And it's very touching, and I thank you for your words.
These words come from the bottom of heart, and even I wish there was a time where I could have done this face to face just to feel the resonance, but I'm happy for that. So let me begin with a very nostalgic question, Mr. Tata. When you look back into your life and achievements and the impact that you have made, what is the sense that you get from this journey?
Well, it's nothing has been orchestrated, if you might, or making up an undertaking, basically, or a image. I have the benefit, I would say, of of being able, to a great extent, to do what I wanted to do or what I considered right to do. I have, by and large, no frustration in having been thwarted from undertaking something. Um, and it's a wonderful feeling, if for most part, because it can never be 100%. For most part, uh, you have been able to set about or conclude something that you felt was important. Someone asked me, "What would you like to be remembered for or as?" Um, After a fair amount of thought, all I could say was that I I would like to be remembered for someone who was able to make a change when he wanted to undertake change and to pursue issues that were important to him.
Thank you. You've been a phenomenal change agent right from the top of the hierarchy to the bottom of humility. I really appreciate that. One of my next question to you is that in many of your conversations, it is evident that your grandmother, Lady Tata, perhaps had the most profound effect on shaping your early life. What were some of those early messages, instructions, and guidelines that laid the foundation of this legendary journey?
There were no guidelines per se. There was a code of conduct that was was conveyed by daily discipline rather than uh, in any codified form. Uh, my grandmother was a person who lived by that kind of code of conduct. It was very important to her more than anything else that uh, she live her life with dignity. And if there was any one attribute you could make to what she lived for, it was the fact that she led a dignified life. If anything had to be um, given up for that dignity, it was done. The dignity came first, and she was quite firm on the fact that you would not cheapen yourself or stoop to a level of something to meet a particular need. You would not lead yourself to be crooked if you meant to meet what your intentions were, but that your image should be that of dignity. Whatever it took to retain that was what we lived for. So to a great extent, she, you know, beat into you the need
Drill down.
to meet that code. Yeah.
Thank you. Last year I was driving in a Uber in New Jersey, and there's a black Afro-American driver, and I love to make conversation. So I asked him, "Who do you admire the most?" And he said, "Mr. Gandhi." And I was quite surprised that thousands of miles away somebody was remembering. So I kind of asked, "Okay, why do you admire him?" And he chose two words. He said, "Oh, I like him because of his ideological philosophy and spiritual discipline." The words he brought so packaged, I was really impressed by the clarity. And later on, he went on to explain those two words. So I'm just going to borrow a little cue from that. What was the ideological philosophy in your life, and what kind of spiritual discipline you live by?
That's for me is somewhat difficult to answer. I'm not a highly religious person. I I consider integrity both um, that you exude and the integrity that you wish to live by as a code as being important attributes. Uh, for for a driver in New Jersey to pick those very clear cut attributes, I think is really a tribute to the Gandhi family in terms of what Mr. Gandhi lived by in his time. I can't add very much to
Sure.
the clarity of what this everyday man would do, feel, other than to say that he didn't go out to solicit that kind of impression.
Yes.
It was there, and it's a wonderful thing when it happens that way.
Thank you. What have been your most interesting or nostalgic memories of your childhood before you left for the US, and how did they shape your future?
Let me start with a jumble, if you might.
Sure.
Um, I I for some reason, an unknown reason, grew up in a family that had been greatly influenced by British grandfather that had been knighted, uh, close friend of King George the Fifth. But I shed all of that in for an unknown reason and was attracted to the United States, the new world, a different set of work ethics, and so in terms of nostalgia, I grew up in a very British influenced family,
Yes.
throwing that to the wind and seeking to be a part of the new world. Why? What caused it to happen are unknown to me. I had the opportunity of spending a month with a friend of my father who was at the UN at that time. My father's friend was at the UN,
Yes.
and I had the chance of being inserted into an American environment. He had a home in Long Island, and so I was injected into his family, whom I knew. But what I meant was I was absorbed into the American culture very fast. It only confirmed that that's where I felt like belonging. And it led me to seek to go to college in the US. And in many ways, I lived about 10 years in the US and
Yes.
was very much at ease with the way of life and the standards that the US had.
Thank you. You mentioned about this the spirit of Long Island in some of the other conversations. What really captured your imagination there when you landed? What is something that struck you that I always belong to this place?
I don't know how to answer that, but it's like a situation where you can say that it was like I'd been here before, or it's exactly like I expected. And there was an issue of everything you did. You didn't go back to your room and say, "This is terrible. What am I going to do?" It was instead
Got it.
immeasurably pleasant and not that it didn't have its moments of
I'm sure.
conflict, but it was a pleasurable experience. Repeated again when I came back to go to college.
Thank you. What are those little adjectives and words, especially the little Ratan by the family, friends, cousins, teachers, school? And which of those words stayed with you for the rest of the life? And which ones you kind of challenged on your way to evolve your identity?
I don't know what that term was, other than the fact that one of my sisters coined this title, which I think was a title that was set by the nannies of that age, and it just got encrusted into a fond title that was there. That's the only thing I can equate it to. I never really carried that title, thank God, around with me. So I think it was something that got into the household infrastructure that
Got it. Those who have been following your life would hardly believe that a person of your stature and the journey as impressive as yours, would have ever had any kind of self doubts or moments of ambiguity. But I'm sure life is not like that. Did such moments ever cross your path? And if yes, how do you handle them?
Uh, yes, actually, in a strange kind of way, that happened to me. As I was in my early year of college, um, I started to be concerned about what would I do after I graduated from college, and what were my interests, and uh, what were the areas that I would enjoy leading a life. One of them correctly was architecture because uh, art and design were areas that I was attracted to. But the other, strangely, was medicine. And in my first year in college, which was I spent 2 years in mechanical engineering,
Yes.
and during that time, uh, the sort of distant appeal was that of being a surgeon. And I was back and forth to India in the summer holidays, and got the chance uh, to be present in surgical procedures
Yes.
at the behest of a surgeon in Bombay. Uh, and contrary to stories of blood making you faint and the smell of uh, and antiseptics, etc., it was a thing that led me to question whether I not be as interested to be a surgeon.
Mm.
It was the rigor of going through medical education that led me to believe that while I had a great interest, I wouldn't have the patience to go through medical school and internship and the rigors of uh, a surgeon's life.
While you took architecture and whether you pursued architecture for designing things, but you have definitely been the chief architecture of Tata as a group and global powerhouse. And the journey, especially after 90, it has taken, I think, somewhere those subconscious skills of architecture have taken the group to a phenomenal height. So it turned out to be quite good.
Well, I've enjoyed going through uh, that development. I just like to uh, take a moment to to go over to the side and say that how do I feel architecture has helped me in my career. Most people would quickly say that they don't see how that could happen, but in actual fact, architecture has many things that sets you up quite well to be a businessman.
Oh, yes.
You spend your early life designing things for other human beings. So the criticality of meeting that demand is high. The need to fulfill that need is high. To represent it in a form that you see and being able to put yourself in the shoes of the client to operate something within the prospect of budget. All of those things put together put you in quite a comfortable position to have the attributes of being a businessman.
Oh, certainly. I feel sometimes that your first career, whether you pursue or build on that, but what you learn from there subconsciously finds its way in many things that you do. Very briefly, while I started as a geologist and then joined military and then consulting in corporations, but those elements of geology, of exploration, excavation, always come into the relationship and the transactions that I do.
No, I think that's exactly the feeling I had when you went through. There's a tide that or a magnet that draws you
Yes,
into something which becomes enjoyable, and then there's a part of it that's necessary,
yes,
and which you just described is exactly what I felt.
yeah. 40 years, I have still not done away with my two books of geology. I still carry as a nostalgia and emotion. And sometimes my wife says, "What you are going to do with geology?" I said, "No, I want to keep it because that was my first love."
Huh.
So those are the kind of emotions. Did you keep any book on architecture or something from your life?
Sorry.
Did you keep any such book from your first career or architecture?
Yes and no. I think most architects of that mid-century period
Yes,
uh, viewed Frank Lloyd Wright as their vanguard. So the works of Frank Lloyd Wright would be uh, etched in a young architect's career. Not so today,
yes,
but at that time, that was it. And so you carried um, works of Wright through the period. The influences of that one person was enormous in the field of architecture.
yes,
A person who was very intolerant, who was very arrogant, but uh, paved the way that most architects of that age lived by.
certainly.
His buildings were the mecca of young architects. You went through his. He was really the driver of young architects through that period.
Thank you for sharing that. In one of your earlier interviews, you mentioned about Ed Winicombe and Sylvia Scott playing the role of surrogate parents. What role did they exactly play in shaping your future, especially in you getting to Cornell?
Okay, there's a little bit of history to explain why the Winicombe is in the first place.
We'd love to hear that.
Um, my father was a member of the International Labour Organization in Geneva for several years as the employer's representative. Also there at the same time was a gentleman called Charlie McCormack, who was the chairman of McCormick Spice
Yes,
in the US, had built that enterprise to be the number one uh, spice and tea uh, enterprise. And my father was invited to join the board of McCormick. Ed Winicombe was one of the senior VPs.
okay,
And when when I moved to the US to go to college, Ed, Ed Winicombe suggested to my father that instead of being in a dormitory, they, it would be nice for me to have a place where I could go to for my holidays or live like an American family. They had no children, had no children living with them. He had a daughter that was elsewhere. And much of that early comfort of being in America was given to me by the Winnicombs, who sort of led me through the acceptable and unacceptable uh, corners of living in the US, gave me a sense of being in a family. So I owe them a lot. Ed was a Cornellian. He went to the hotel school in the U.S. in Cornell, and um, had an influence in my going to Cornell as against MIT, which was the other place I had a desire to go to.
Thank you. In life, so many people actually come in our life who play such an important role. And without they being there, we couldn't have progress. And I often relate this to kind of luck. And in my conversations on leadership, I invite people to ask a question, to write down how many times do they think they have been lucky. And that's where they surprise that all the credit they give to hard work, luck plays a very important role. My next question to you, Mr. Tata. Many of life's defining memories, like take birth from our day one experiences. Which were your top three day one experiences that created a lasting, a transformative experience for you? Was it Riverdale, Cornell, Jamshedpur, or Flying F-16?
I think if I go back in time, um, the interest in aviation was back there. My my first remembrances of flying was sitting on my father's lap or my mother's lap and holding the aircraft. No big deal, but for a young kid, it was uh, it was like driving a racing car. It had a thrill uh, to it. So that would certainly be one one area. The the other that I'm coming off the wall just now based on your question. I had a huge interest in the world under the ocean.
Oh,
So basically, I became an avid scuba diver
wonderful.
uh, for 15, 20 years. I perforated my eardrum several times over. It finally had to quit because of
Pressure.
the pressure and the danger to losing my hearing altogether. But I've dived in most of the diving spots in the Pacific and the Middle East. Um, and have fortunately never lost my limb to sharks or any, maybe came closer to
Oh, really?
losing my limb to human sharks, but
Oh, yes.
not the sharks in the ocean. Uh, so those two come to mind. I can't think of a third offhand.
And how was the experience with flying the F-16?
That came much later.
Yes,
The flying the F-16 was a phenomenal experience, but an experience where you expected much more and you're more closely connected to aviation at that time, other than being a 6-year-old sitting on the lap of your parent.
certainly. So have you seen the movie Top Gun in your time, or were you kind of impressed by the movie? Did you see the movie?
I saw the movie. It was a great movie and very much the kind of movie that draws you into uh, flying, which I was already doing, but into professional flying in the Air Force.
When the movie was featuring, I think either I had joined the army or I was in the early days, and we were very crazy about the movie, and especially the shot when Tom Cruise is driving on his bike and then jet is flying. That's one of the best shots stays in my memory. Thank you for taking us through these wonderful day one experiences. Let me ask, what's a typical day in the life of Mr. Ratan Tata?
But today, that day would be very different from what it was 20 years ago. Um, Many of my single day remembrances would be the excitement of trying something new, something that I hadn't done. If I look back, and I'm going to have to ask you not to ask me the next question, that what was that area, because I can't recall what it was, but something that, um, for example, when I was in training in Jamshedpur, um I was told that I would have to go underground to the collieries that were 500-600 feet below the surface. Air that was not fresh,
Yes,
and the element of danger always there, that there was a collapse of
fine.
the coal mine.
Yes,
That to me would be an exciting day. Um, the other, which comes to mind just now as an example, um, I got the chance to visit one of the Indian Navy submarines in the Bombay harbor. And while there, um, they showed me the torpedo tubes, which happened also to be a way of leaving the submarine underwater by being projected out with a flush of water.
yes,
And I was asked whether I would like to go into the tube itself to get a feel of what it felt like. And I instantly agreed. And I went down the shiny tube, um, which was terrific. Then I had to come out, which meant I had to come out backwards. And it seemed like it never ended. And I panicked. And those kinds of memories would be ones I would not forget.
I can make out that whenever an opportunity for adventure has come your way, you have taken it with both hands, isn't it?
Yeah, it'd be a sense of defeat and being afraid to do something.
Hmm. Okay. When people get a glimpse into someone's life as illustrious as yours, there's a natural curiosity to know about that person's interests, like interest with books, movies, music, or even events in their life. So, was there any particular book, movie, or piece of music, literature, anything that touched you which you like to share?
I can't pick out anything uh, specific. I love music. I I have had, I guess, only thing I would say that I have not been attracted to is boxing. It to me made no sense to beat up another person. Um, so that has been a sport that I have not enjoyed. But otherwise, I have an interest in many areas. I can't pick out one of them.
What kind of music you love the most?
It's all Western music, but it's both classical and contemporary.
Thank you. If you had an option of rewinding your life and doing two things differently, what would that be?
Well, I think they've all been passing phases in my life. Being a test pilot was one of the early uh, attractions. The surgeon I've already described that happened. Um, I can't say that I have been fulfilling in terms of moving um, in the musical area to the extent of writing music, or there hasn't been that level of interest. But these other areas have been areas that have drawn me.
So, we know your interest and passion for the dogs. Um, who has been your favorite dog, or what kind of enjoyments you relish with your dogs?
Well, we've always had a dog in the house. I grew up with a dog that was not uh, purebred, and made that was a good place to start because you didn't end up with any preconditions in your mind. Um, any dog that is affectionate, and most dogs are,
Yeah.
um, would draw me to that dog. And more often than not, that dog has been ill-treated and looking for shelter, if you might, or they're looking for a partner just as much as you are.
Oh, yes.
So uh, I have a young man in my office who has spent his spare time and has marshaled the interests of other young people in finding homes for these stray dogs that have been there, and he's had my encouragement. There's a lot that can be done in the US. There's a new view that
Yes.
giving stray dogs to prisoners in prison give them something to direct their affections towards and help those hard nut people to enjoy the affection and strength that comes from a dog that has nothing to do with the murders that may have taken place with the individual, but comes out making that person a more human person in a tough environment.
Thank you for sharing that. As I've been listening to your thoughts and your fondness for doing new things, one thing that comes to my mind is many ways you have been a beginner's mind, or you have been a proponent of a beginner's mindset. And how do you keep infusing uh, or doing what are the things that you do to retain and maintain that beginner's mind? I believe beginner's mind has lots of possibilities and experts have only few possibilities. What are your thoughts on this?
Well, one way to kind of answer your question is if you look at something that you haven't done or haven't experienced and you shun it before you have a chance to savor it, you've lost an opportunity to widen your perspective. So if it's not treating stray dogs on the road, or if it's not skydiving from a plane, or it's not undertaking some feat that you want to come back on. Say, I tried that. I didn't like it, or I was greatly attracted to it. Um, so I would say I've been drawn into something that I haven't done. Today, I can't say that because age also now prevents you from doing the things you would want to do when you were in your 20s.
Yes.
Um, and there's always a sadness that I can't do it, or I am too scared to do it, or things of that nature. So it is it is a moving target that happens as you go through the rigors of something that you want to be. I, for example, always wanted to go into outer space, to walk in space with the Earth, uh, looking at the Earth would be, to my mind, a wonderful experience. Why haven't I done it? I haven't done it for uh, reasons which, in some ways, I'm ashamed to say, but I've not done it because it costs $35 million to be out in space, and that I can think of many things I would like to do for that kind of money. But if it were within the realm of being able to do it, I would have done it by now.
Or maybe Elon Musk, if he listens to this conversation, he comes up with an idea in the near future and he offers you a ride to the space. I can wish for
So can I.
that. Thank you for sharing this. Mr. Tara, thank you very much for giving us a glimpse of your early life, inspiration, the experiments and leaps of faith. I know it's very hard to capture the essence in just one conversation. So I eagerly look forward to our next episode where we shall focus on your vision, some of the bold choices that you have made, your leadership institution building, and impact that you have created. So till then, a very gracious thank you from me, my team at Strategic Mindset. We are truly indebted for your time. And as you said that while age is catching up, I know, but there's a lot you are already doing through your words in terms of inspiring people to do something bigger and strategic.
Thank you very much. And thank you for the generous uh, commitment you have made in time. And I've enjoyed interacting with you.